You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio. Freedom Radio.
Now more from Frank Gaffney.
And welcome back. We are joined now by Congressman Pete Hoekstra, the ranking Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, a great patriot, a leader on the national security program of the United States, and a man who's really gone to school on the sorts of threats I was talking about before the break. Congressman Hoekstra, thank you so much for joining us. And let's jump into this. We got a lot to cover in a very short period of time. I wanted to start with the prospect that Barack Obama, in closing Guantanamo Bay, as he seems intent upon doing, is determined to put into your state of Michigan a new Guantanamo in the Midwest, I think is what it's being called.
Well, I'll tell you, Frank, the president made an ill-advised decision on January 21 when he said that he was going to close Gitmo and it would be shut down within a year. He'd had no information, no background on these folks, and he made a rash statement. The bottom line is, if you knew what I knew, if the American people had access to the kind of information that I have on the Gitmo detainees, who they are, what they've done, and what challenges they pose to the people who are incarcerating them, they would say, leave them in Gitmo. Don't put them in Michigan. Don't put them in Kansas. Don't put them in Colorado. Leave them in Gitmo. I think, Frank, in 6 months, Gitmo is still going to be open because the president is going to have found out that there's a reason that Gitmo exists, and that by just changing the zip code of where these prisoners are housed is not going to fix the problem that our Europeans have with Gitmo.
Yeah, I think you're very, very much correct about that. The other point that you've made, which I think is certainly an appropriate one for not only your state, but for that matter, any other state where these guys might be planted in the event that this crazy idea does go forward, Congressman, is to transform your state into what you've called a terrorist penal colony. And you've indicated that you will vigorously fight any attempt to do this in a way that will really undermine the effort to bring new jobs to your state, which is ostensibly the point of this exercise. You might just say a word about why you think this is not going to be good, a stimulus, as they say, for your state.
Yeah, having Michigan branded as the penal colony is a jihadist is a bad idea. Not only do these people pose a real threat to the community, but there's also a PR factor associated with this, and the PR, the public relations with it would also be detrimental. You know, I'm up here in northern Michigan. This is God's country. This is a beautiful state, and we have a whole lot more going for us than being the dumping ground to become a penal colony. So, it's a bad idea on a lot of different levels.
Okay, Congressman, let's jump to another aspect of this, which I know you understand very well, particularly in light of your work on the Intelligence Committee in the House, and that is the problem of homegrown jihadists, as they're called, of particularly people who are being recruited to Sharia in our prison systems and told that it is God's will when they get out that they must go do this kind of violent holy war. What are we to think of the idea of allowing, set aside the question of them breaking out or attacks upon the prisons from the community surrounding them, what are we to think of the idea of encouraging these prison systems to become even more intense incubators of terror in the future?
Well, I think we've seen it. I think there was just a recent court decision on Richard Reed where he was kind of segregated. This is the shoe bomber who was segregated from the rest of the prison population. Now the courts have ruled that, no, you have to allow him to integrate with other people who are like-minded, maybe even the general prison population, and it becomes kind of like a cancer within the prison system. It grows and expands, metastasizes, and it's nothing but trouble. And taking more of these people and putting them and sprinkling them throughout our prison system, has proven to be problematic. And the other thing you can take a look at is, not only what we've experienced here in the United States, but what we've seen overseas.
Yes.
In places in Europe where this whole phenomenon of homegrown terrorism has progressed further than what we've seen it in the United States, but is beginning to pose real problems, fundamental problems that are very difficult to address. These people want to, they convert to Sharia. They want to live under Sharia law. In certain countries now, they're petitioning that, we don't really want to live under the laws of your country. We want to live under Sharia law. It's a basic tenet of freedom. You believe in freedom of religion. You should allow us to do this. They use our own logic and our own arguments against us.
Yes, absolutely. We're talking to Congressman Pete Hoekstra of Michigan, in the wilds of northern Michigan. And I want to thank you, by the way, for appearing at the press conference that the Center for Security Policy hosted last week with the author of that article in the Wall Street Journal, Deborah Burlingame, and for your contributions there to the effort we're making to ensure that citizens of this country, both in Michigan and elsewhere, understand where their representatives stand. And at securefreedom.org, we have a wonderful database that shows not only the stalwart position that you've taken, Congressman Pete Hoekstra, but that your colleagues have to varying degrees taken on the two fundamental questions: should Guantanamo Bay be closed, and should these terrorists be relocated to the United States? So I want to thank you for that. While I segue to another subject before we run out of time, as you know, there have been reports of Russian attack submarines operating off the east coast of the United States. And it's a little troubling to me that this has been the response that we've gotten out of the Defense Department on this question to date.
While it is interesting and noteworthy that they are in this part of the world, it doesn't pose any threat.
Doesn't pose any threat, Congressman Hoekstra. What do you think about the Russians having their attack submarines perhaps within 200 miles of our East Coast?
Well, I think, number one, the statement would be correct. At least in the short term, it doesn't pose a threat. But I think what it signals, again, is the new belligerence of Russia. Their intent to rebuild their military capability, their desire, I think, to use their natural resources, i.e. natural gas and oil, as political weapons, and for them to re-exert their authority, they're trying to re-exert their influence on a global basis. This is a reemergence of Russia, and I think, whether you look at North Korea, Iran, or Russia, what they see coming out of the current administration is a belief that you can negotiate everything. And that the strength of America is in the office of the president and his ability to persuade people. And they're all taking advantage of us. They're all flexing their muscles, kind of waiting to see what the American response will be. And they're not seeing much of one.
Yeah, Congressman Pete Hoekstra of Michigan, I call this the Obama doctrine, which is emboldening our enemies, undermining our allies, and diminishing our own country. And I think you couldn't be more right that the likelihood is that as these various aggressive dictatorships become more assertive and see no pushback, no resistance on our part, we're going to get more bad behavior. But in that regard, let me just, drill down here for a minute, because as a man who has for some time now had the responsibility, first as chairman of the Intelligence Committee and now as the ranking member of it, to monitor our intelligence capabilities, are you satisfied, Congressman Pete Hoekstra, that we understand adequately the seriousness of the threat that these Russian forces may represent. And again, this is not happening in isolation, as you know. There are bombers that are being sortied now against our northern frontiers with some regularity by the Russians. There are armadas, surface ships, not just submarines, that are being sent into Latin America and the like. At what point would you say this kind of belligerence, if you will, this kind of assertiveness or aggressiveness even, does begin to translate into an actual threat?
The threat becomes a longer-term threat, and you've used the term very appropriately. It's a diminishing of American prestige and the perception of American power and the perception of America unwilling to use its position to defend who we are and what we are. And so, and we will slowly see the impact and see it erode as our allies become nervous about our level of support towards them, and whether we can be counted on to stand with them in difficult times. And that's when it becomes a real problem. And it's not one big fell swoop, and it's not one dramatic action. It is this slow drip, drip, drip in erosion of American influence that we all should be worried about, because an erosion of our influence allows bad actors to take advantage of situations, and eventually they will make a mistake where America has to resign or has to respond.
Right.
That's what we're looking at.
Right. Well, and in particular, I would just say with respect to these attack submarines, one of the things that attack submarines are designed to do is to kill other submarines, and specifically, in the case of the Russians, our ballistic missile submarines. And to have them operating off the coast of, for example, Kings Bay, Georgia, which, as you know, is one of the bases that we use to home port what remains of our strategic deterrent at sea. That's something, again, I'm not going to try to say we know at the moment that line is crossed, but boy, I'll tell you, I don't think we should be as sanguine as the press spokesman at the Pentagon in that clip we just heard made it sound. Let me segue again, if I may, Congressman, because you've got such a breadth of knowledge, and you're so attuned to these kinds of trajectories that I'd like you to spend the remaining couple of minutes we have with you today to talk about Latin America. I mentioned that the Russians are engaged there. The Chinese are engaged there. But the biggest problem, it appears, is Hugo Chavez. And what do we make of reports, for example, that Hugo Chavez is now sending uranium to Iran? And otherwise engaging in sort of strategic partnerships that are not only a menace to his neighbors in the region, but arguably to our interests as well.
Again, this is a guy that we're giving a lot of latitude and a lot of movement, the ability to move. His whole in Honduras, we're not standing. Perhaps with the quote-unquote the right people, and we're maybe supporting the people that are supporting or that are being supported by Hugo Chavez. We give him a tremendous amount of latitude in Colombia, where you've got people that are doing a lot of work to help and assist the United States, and we undercut our friends. And this is, like you said, this is right in our backyard. This is a guy that's welcoming a relationship with Iran. This is a guy that has embraced Castro and embraced communism and the takeover of public and private industry by government. There's nothing good that comes from embracing these people and believing that we can negotiate with them. You got to stand up to them.
Yeah, I could not agree more with you. And again, it is so refreshing, and I'm sure that our Secure Freedom Radio listening audience will find it equally so, to have a member of Congress, a senior member of Congress, who has the clarity that you do about this problem and who's willing, quite quite directly to talk about it. We need more of it, and I hope Congressman Pete Hoekstra of Michigan, you will not only continue to provide that kind of leadership in your state and in the United States House of Representatives, but also here with our Secure Freedom Radio listening audience. Thank you so much for being with us today. When we return in just a moment, we're going to be talking more about this problem in our backyard, this metastasizing cancer of Hugo Chavez, and what it means to you. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.